Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman, congratulations on your nomination. Senator Cornyn underscored the Will Hurd op-ed. I think it's very important, and I hope that folks here read that as well. Congressman Hurd's obviously widely respected on these issues. Thanks for the time that we've had over the last few weeks. In the classified session, I'm going to ask you some more questions to press you on whether you think the ODNI works right now, whether it's a functioning bureaucratic layer or whether it's an encumbrance, whether the post-9/11 reasons that it were created are actually being advanced. But one of the specific pieces of that we'll talk about in a classified setting that I want to unpack more fully here is, you know, it's my view, there's no more pressing national security threat the United States faces than the next decade of the tech race with China. And all 17 of our intelligence agencies, but especially the CIA and the NSA, are getting that message, and they're ramping it up. But we've been talking about a pivot to China for 10 or 15 years in this country, and I think the agencies are still slow to devote sufficient mind share, money, personnel, et cetera, to the China threat. So in this public setting, a rare thing for the intelligence community, where you get to speak directly to the American people, can you explain what the Made in China 2025 initiative is and why China's pursuing it and whether the American people should be concerned?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Senator. And you and I have talked, and earlier I identified China as the greatest threat that we face, the greatest threat actor that we face moving forward for the exact reasons that you've talked about. Made in China 2025 is one of many initiatives that the Chinese government, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Military Civil Fusion Initiative, all initiatives of the same, or all spokes of the same initiative for China to supplant us as the global power in all respects. And so, you know, it's why I think you and I agree that China is the rising threat, and why we have to look at the national intelligence policy framework and our budgeting and our resource allocation to make sure that we're dedicating towards all of these different initiatives where an authoritarian regime wants to set the marketplace rules, as they do with Made in China 2025, where they want Chinese companies dominating industry across 10 different sectors, just as they want with the military fusion, Chinese companies gathering and collecting intelligence and sharing it with the Chinese Communist Party. Whereas with Belt and Road, they want to dominate all of the hubs for trade routes and telecommunication. All of these things are China trying to essentially supplant free marketplace standards and values like liberty and free speech and all of the things that we have with authoritarian values that are reflected in some of the things that are happening in this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, before we get to the way they're using coronavirus and COVID, just stay for a second at the Chinese Communist Party's use of tech and maybe emphasize AI in particular. How do the communists who lead China, and to be clear, when U.S. businesses pretend that there is a public-private sector distinction in China, they're exaggerating. There is not much of a public-private sector distinction in China, but it's understandable, both because U.S. companies want those markets, 1.4 billion people and 400 million are middle class. There are more middle class people in China than in the U.S. Of our 325 million, only about 250 are middle class. So there's a lot of consumers in China. It makes sense that U.S. producers would be interested in having access to those markets. But also, it's important for us to always underscore that our opponent here is not the Chinese people. Our opponent is the communist leadership of China. But what is the Communist Party trying to do with tech and with AI in particular?
So we use an example, because I'll start with 5G, because 5G leads to AI, AI leads to quantum. And to your point about where the Chinese Communist Party stops and starts, it's hard to tell with a company like Huawei. And if Huawei has an obligation to share information under Chinese law with the Chinese Communist Party, and they are creating global networks, and our information is going over those lines, and our allies that we're sharing information with, that's jeopardizing our information, it's jeopardizing our troops. All of these things are basically put at risk with respect to that. And so, again, this is just why you are so correct, Senator, in terms of making sure that we are balanced in terms of where we are investing in terms of the global threat landscape, pandemic, 5G, AI, I don't want to say all roads to lead to China, but a lot of them do.
What are the technical fields that you're most concerned about them being at or equal to us in terms of their long-term plotting against us? A generation, I think Eric Schmidt, the former executive chairman of Google, regularly talks about a tech generation as being 18-ish months. What technical fields are you most concerned about their near parity arrival with us?
Yeah, so I mean, just in terms of the point, cybersecurity generally, tying in, I mentioned 5G, but one of the things that I'm most concerned about is investment towards quantum computing. We have with the NSA, we have the best code makers and breakers in the world. General Nakasone, I think you and I agree, is a national treasure. But if China gets to quantum first, we're in trouble. And so that, for me, was one of the, when we look at investments and looking forward and the challenges that we face, and the fact that China's investing more towards those technologies than the United States presently, we need to rebalance.
I'm going to give it back to the chairman here, but I just want to underscore the point you just made. I'm a small government guy, but we are radically underinvesting in a lot of the fields that you just mentioned. Paul Nakasone is an absolute national treasure, but the team he leads at the NSA, lots of their work is made obsolete if the quantum race is won by China, and we're underinvesting in that space. Thanks. I look forward to the classified time this afternoon.